Now we're going to look at some of the settings available for these filters. Instead of showing you every single part of every single filter though, which isn't really necessary, I'm going to show you a group of settings that are common to most of the filters. Once you understand these, working with filters should be easy. In my Flash file here that I've continued from the last lesson, I've applied one of each of the Flash filters to my object. You can do this yourself by simply clicking the plus button and working down the list. We're going to start by looking at the last one. This is just a simple way to change the color of an object, like some of the color modifiers we discussed earlier. So I'm going to kick that one out of our sandbox, and we'll concentrate on the rest of them. If I select each one of these filters in turn, we start to see some common settings. The first set of these is the first column, just to the right of the filters list. Let's have a look at drop shadow. First, we have blur X and blur Y. This is fairly simple. We're just telling Flash how far we want the blur effect to extend. I'll turn off all the other effects and crank this up. You can see the effect here. Notice the padlock here. By default, these values are constrained to be equal, and this makes it easy to create realistic effects, like normal drop shadows. For cooler effects involving things like motion blur, you can click this lock, and then we can set these values independently. Next, we have strength. It pretty much lets you control the visibility of the effect you're playing with. At the bottom, you let them, filters can eat up a whole pile of processing power on the viewer's computer. So Flash tries to help you avoid being silly by starting with low quality. This doesn't look as good as high, of course, but it uses much less CPU power. Personally, I always set this to high and then keep my filter usage to a minimum. This way, your filters still look good, and the extra added bonus is that you'll be less likely to go nuts with them and create a monstrosity of overdone filters. The philosophy of less is more is always a good one to follow with Flash. Okay, the next setting here is color, and it's just a boring color picker. So let's have a look at angle and distance. Imagine a light shining onto your object, creating this drop shadow, and angle and distance control the actual location of this light. Here's where you can get a nice soft shadow effect by turning the distance down. We'll take it down to 2, and the X and Y blurs up. So we'll take them to 12. Drop the strength around to about 50. And now we have a really cool, nice, soft shadow effect. To see this better, I might get rid of our stroke. There we go, a very subtle shadow. Okay, moving on, we have some checkboxes. Knockout will make your object invisible and only display the shadow, but the shape of your object will be cut out of the shadow. To do the same thing without cutting out your object's shape, turn Knockout off and select Hide Object. Now we only see the shadow. Easy. And finally, we have Inner Shadow. This, not surprisingly, places the shadow inside the object rather than outside. Let's say we want to make it look like a hole has been cut in the surface of our background. Hit Inner Shadow and Hide Object. Deselect, and we have a hole. Okay, let's have a look at the rest of the filters to see if there's anything we haven't covered. Blur and glow are easy. They have the same or fewer settings, but bevel has a few new ones: shadow and highlight. Shadow is the darker color at the bottom right, and highlight is the lighter one at top left. Pretty straightforward. Gradient glow and gradient bevel add color sliders, and we've pretty much covered the operation of these in our lesson on the color mixer panel. So I think it's time to move on to the next lesson.